Good morning. I would like to welcome our very distinguished guest to this forum. Ms. Benazir Bhutto does not need any introduction. Dr. Bottoms did that in the last hour. And this is going to be a very informal question-answer session, which should last for about 45 to 50 minutes. I would like to say just one or two things to Prime Minister Bhutto. First of all, that you have won many hearts while walking from Maheri Hall to this place. I spoke with 2 or 3 students. One student said that, well, I would like to move to Pakistan. And the other student said that, well, I was literally in tears listening to the story of Ms. Bhutto. So you have many, many supporters here. And I am sure that you will have many converts to any campus that you will go. I would like to begin by just asking my question. And it will not take more than a minute or two. My question is about party politics in Pakistan. The history of Pakistan suggests that political parties have not worked very well in Pakistan, to say the least. The usual functions of political parties, as we political scientists think, are 3: interest articulation, number 1, interest aggregation, number 2, and policy formulation, number 3. Now, we find that these functions have not been performed by Pakistani political parties, although there are a few short-lived exceptions. There are 4 explanations for such ineffectiveness. I believe they are the following. Number 1, personalism. Parties are very personalized in Pakistan. You have 2 leaders dying in the first decade of Pakistan's independence, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan, and then the party disintegrates. Okay, that is the Muslim League Party. Second factor is regionalism. You have parties which are based in one province or the other. For example, your party, Madam Prime Minister, is mainly based in rural Sindh, and it does have some following in Punjab, but not a whole lot. In the last election, out of 19 seats, 18 seats were won from rural Sindh. Similarly, if you look at MQM, which is based mainly in urban Sindh, or especially in Karachi, and I don't have the exact numbers here. No, I do have. MQM won 12 seats, and they were all from Sindh. So the second problem I see is regionalism. Then the third factor is factionalism. Okay. And you will find that, well, with one faction leaving the party, the leader will take all the followers. Okay. And finally, there has been a history of repression, which hopefully is over now. Now, Pakistan has now had civilian governments for 9 years. Madam Prime Minister, if you agree with this explanation that I have provided, how soon do you think Pakistani political parties will rise above 3 things: personalism, regionalism, and factionalism?
Dear, I wish I brought a notebook. May I borrow yours? No, may I borrow your notes? No, may I borrow your notes? About the regionalism and the factionalism, your last sentence, if I could just go to that. If you could just give me your last sentence.
Do you agree with this explanation?
I'll give it back. Do you think that Pakistani political parties will rise above personalism, regionalism, and factionalism?
That's right.
If I could put it in a broader South Asian context, I wonder whether the political parties in South Asia will be able to rise above personalism, regionalism, and factionalism. For instance, we've seen that after the death of Rajiv Gandhi, in India, the Congress has no unifying leader and is today torn apart by factionalism. If we turn our attention to Bangladesh, we see that the politics of Bangladesh has been dominated by Sheikh Hasina and Begum Zia, and one wonders what will happen to their parties when both of them are not there. If we turn our attention to Sri Lanka, we see also that it has actually been the Bandanaike and the anti-Bandanaike forces which have dominated the politics of Sri Lanka. And of course, in Pakistan, I believe for the last 3 decades or more, it's Bhutto and anti-Bhutto politics that have dominated the landscape. So there does seem to be a lot of personalism in leadership in the political parties in South Asia. I myself would now like to see as my greatest legacy the fact that there is a proper transition to a new leadership within my party. And that's one of the reasons why I've taken the decision that I don't want to contest for Prime Minister again. And during my lifetime, I want to be there to see a new leadership emerge. And if there are any problems, then at least my authority will still be there to prevent factionalism from taking place. So I am making an attempt which I think is unique in the history of South Asia, because I can't think of any other South Asian who led a political party and during their lifetime decided they didn't want to seek the highest political office. But I sometimes wonder whether personalism is relegated to South Asia or whether it has a much wider context. Because, for instance, if we look at England, the politics of the Conservative Party were really dominated by Mrs. Thatcher to such a great extent that the Conservative Party came to be known as the Thatcherite Party. And until the Labour Party was able to find a young and dynamic leader like Tony Blair, it was not able to sell its message. And so too in America, where until Clinton rose on the horizon, there seemed to be nobody within the Democratic Party who could attract the attention. So there are parties, there are interest articulations, but people always seem to see in the leader a symbol of the articulation. And I think that having a party machinery, but also having a leader is essential to the success of a political party, and the one cannot be divorced from the other. There might be a person like Ross Perot, who as an individual has a lot of money and he can spend it, but if he doesn't have the party machinery behind him, he can't get anywhere. And there may be an old party machinery like the Labour Party, but if it doesn't have a leader that clicks with the generation or the times, like Tony Blair, despite having the party machinery and articulating interests, it cannot succeed. In Pakistan, I feel political parties, and I've spoken on this subject myself, have had their growth retarded because of long periods of military rule. The reason is that during the period of military rule, everybody's fighting for democracy. So because everybody's fighting for democracy, nobody's talking about what is the population growth rate, what is the deficit. And even now, people think that we've had the resumption of democracy in Pakistan since 1985. But I feel that the intelligence forces are very much in control and have not accepted democracy. And that the focus of the intelligence forces is to bring about a collapse of the power structure. So if the power structure collapses, they can turn around and tell the West that, look, we've tried all these political parties, but they're not mature enough for an illiterate society like Pakistan. And that's why in 8 years we've had the sacking of 4 governments. Now the question is that if each time a government since 1985 has come into power, the focus has not been on population or health, if people insist on writing just about corruption. Because that's what's happened to 4 administrations in 8 years. People have only talked about corruption. So nobody in Pakistan is educated on what the deficit is. People are told that if corruption goes, unemployment will go, inflation will go. So they think that if this set of rulers go because they're corrupt, we'll get a green garden. That's not the fact. So I think that this is one of the difficulties that developing societies like Pakistan face, that people think there are easy answers and there's nobody really to, we try to educate them and say that they're not easy answers. And I think the fact that we have not had a constitution that has been there from 1947, we keep changing our constitution, the fact that we've had governments that do not complete their terms has retarded the growth of political parties in Pakistan.
Thank you. You should feel free.
Ms. Bhutto, a few weeks ago, Dr. David Ho the AIDS researcher who was Times Man of the Year, visited our campus and talked to us about the challenge of stopping the AIDS epidemic. And what he pointed to, both in this room and in the hall you spoke a few minutes ago, was the fact that in your part of the world is the greatest challenge to stop the spread of AIDS, India and Pakistan. And he said, if we don't stop it there, we're going to lose this battle. And those two countries are still in denial about even the existence of AIDS. Could you talk to us about that a little bit, please?
Yes, there was a lot of denial about AIDS in Pakistan. And in fact, whenever the subject was brought about, people would have very simplistic answers. The simplistic answers would be, and I hope you all won't mind my saying it, that if you stop American sailors from coming into Karachi, there'll be no AIDS in Pakistan, because sometimes the ships dock. Now that's obviously a ridiculous situation, because Pakistanis live abroad and travel abroad and can get it from blood transfusions. So we started talking about AIDS, and when we started talking about AIDS in Pakistan, it made a lot of people uncomfortable. I mean, it made my cabinet ministers uncomfortable. They said, this is not a subject one talks about. So there is a great traditional reticence. Somehow AIDS is connected with intimate matters, not blood transfusions. There's a lack of education on how it can be spread. So we started a program to try and raise awareness about AIDS in Pakistan. But what was our most significant achievement was that we said that every hospital must screen blood for AIDS, because people were being given blood that was not screened as transfusions. So all the major hospitals in Pakistan today have AIDS screening facilities. But we were not successful in making AIDS a topic that could be discussed on television or radio, because there was a lot of public resentment against that. So we decided instead that we would use the universities, and that when people were graduating, they would be given a course on population planning and on AIDS, so that there would be a greater awareness about the subject. I think that because of the steps we have taken in discreetly raising awareness about AIDS, and because we have forced hospitals, private hospitals have been forced by law and public hospitals have been helped by government to screen AIDS, we are trying to tackle the issue. But this is not enough, and I wish we could do more, but somehow this is an issue that people don't want to talk about.
Mrs. Bhutto, as you have spoke today, you've championed yourself as a protector and defender of democracy, and indeed your past has shown that. However, does this coincide with, as you were quoted in another leading U.S. daily just after the most recent election with Prime Minister Sharif, you said that the election was rigged and you weren't willing to accept the results unless a victory was given to you. How does this affect the prospects of democracy in Pakistan? And furthermore, or perhaps maybe this is just misinformation by this leading U.S. daily newspaper.
Well, what I actually said before the election was that if the president wanted us to accept the results of the election, number one, there should be a neutral interim set up. Number two, the TV should be stopped from daily spreading poison against the PPP. And number three, I said that the votes must be counted immediately at 4 p.m. when polling started. And I said, otherwise we will not accept the results. If you want us to accept it, assure us that the votes will be counted as soon as polling closes, that the media will stop its poisonous tirade against us, and number three, there will be a neutral government. Well, this didn't happen. And when the election results were concluded at 4 o'clock, the returning officers disappeared and said, it's the month of fasting. We've gone to open our fast. Then after the fast was opened at 6 o'clock, they disappeared again and said that we are not available because we've got to go and say our prayers, which are called the Taraweeh prayers. So polling was supposed to be from 7 a.m. till 4 p.m. But counting was supposed to be over between 4 to 5. But the counting took from 4 to 12. That means there were 8 hours for doing something with ballot boxes. I held a press conference and I said that every single independent observer has said that the turnout of the elections was 15%. But the Election Commission has said the turnout is 40%. And I said that if you take out the smaller provinces and go just to Punjab, the turnout is 50%. And in the history of Pakistan, there's never been a 50% turnout. And I said, I'd like you to quote me any one country since the end of the Cold War, which has been a non-communist country where a 90% turnout has occurred without the boycott, because I think 90% turnouts only took place in communist countries. I said, just name me one country where any popular leader or any leader got a 90% showing where there was a contest. And I said, the third thing is, in the post-Cold War era, tell me about one country where there's been a 2/3 majority, leave alone. In Pakistan, we had a 3/4 majority, because when you get 90%, it's a 3/4 majority. So I said, since the end of the Cold War, we've had split mandates. And we have had simple majorities. It's only now, I think, that Tony Blair has come out with this whopping victory after 18 years. But till that time, there was nobody who had got more than a simple majority. If you looked at Spain, split mandate. If you looked at Portugal, France, the previous elections in England, the elections in Germany, all split mandates. So I said that, despite the fact that international observers say it was 15%, and you say it's 40%, despite the fact that the count was at 4%, at 4 p.m. and you didn't start till 12, which makes us suspicious that boxes were changed. I said, despite the fact that you say there's a 90% majority which only communist countries get, I said, despite the fact, I accept these results. I said, you brought him in. Whoever has brought him in expects me to take to the streets, so that when I'm in government, Nawaz goes to the streets. When he's in government, I go to the streets. So I said, I'm not going to do what you all want me to do. You want democracy to fail? I'm not going to do. You know that he bankrupted the economy when he was Chief Minister Punjab. You know he bankrupted the economy when he was Prime Minister of Pakistan. And you brought him in, live with him. And I said, I'm not going to do anything. I want him to finish his mandate, and I give him 5 years. Because I think the people who manipulate the polls are used to a certain reaction. So I want to deny them that reaction in the hope that I can break that chain of events.
You talked this morning, you didn't say anything about India and Pakistan, the problems between these two countries. Could you please share your thoughts with us?
Yes, India and Pakistan have had a very troubled relationship in the last 50 years. We've had 4 wars fought, and these 4 wars have taken a very heavy toll. And right now there's an uprising in the valley of Jammu and Kashmir, and that itself is taking a heavy toll both in India and Pakistan. In India for different reasons, and in Pakistan because it's a very important issue for us right there on our border. So relations between India and Pakistan have remained moribund for the last 50 years. I thought there was a chance for a breakthrough when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister, because I felt he had a far greater vision. And it was during his time that we got to sign the first important non-attack on each other's nuclear facilities. Our relations are not only compounded because of Kashmir, they're also compounded because of issues relating to nuclear development and missile development. And every time India takes a step in the nuclear field, Pakistan feels it has to follow. And if India takes a step in the missile field, Pakistan feels that it has to follow. And I think Pakistan and India made such a mess of trying to solve their problems over the last 50 years that it's important for third-party mediation. And when I met with President Clinton, I urged upon him that America, as the sole superpower, had an interest in the maintenance of peace in the subcontinent, and a subcontinent where there was proliferation. And I hope that India and Pakistan's problems can be sorted out, because I feel it's really a very dangerous situation where we have not only had 4 wars, a continuing tension over Kashmir, but that we both have access to nuclear technology, it makes one feel very unsafe. I had hoped that new generation of leaders, like the Gandhis had been in India and the Bhuttos had been in Pakistan. The Gandhis had seen assassination and the Bhuttos had seen assassination. Rajiv Gandhi was post-partition and I was also born post-partition. So I'd hoped that both of us would have been able to deal with these issues and usher in an era of peace. And I was delighted that we made progress on the non-attack on each other's nuclear facilities and that we widened the scope of trade between our countries. But fate intervened because his government went, and then my government went, and then just before I was re-elected, he was killed. So fate intervened. The new Indian Prime Minister and my Prime Minister are meeting shortly. I know Mr. Gujral. I had the opportunity of meeting him, and I think that he's a very learned man, but he has a coalition government, and I'm not sure whether coalition governments are conducive to the kind of concessions that negotiations demand. However, I wish them good luck, but my own view is that third-party mediation is necessary. And after the settlement of the Middle East, after the end of apartheid in South Africa, it's time for third-party mediation to resolve Indo-Pak disputes.
Thank you. I think I have are there 2? Am I next?
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry. I have a question about the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, about which things I know very little. But I was very interested in your talk, and I very much understood that working with those bodies was absolutely crucial for any kind of stability and for a developing country to take its place in the global economy and all of that. One does, however, hear criticisms of those bodies and of the way that they deal with countries in the developing world. Particularly, one hears criticisms of how full their understanding may be of the need for certain social programs, of the need to fund women's projects, of the need to surely it was, for example, not particularly helpful for them to put pressure on your government to bring the deficit down at that particular juncture. And I'm curious to know if you would talk a little bit about the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund sort of as global players in this sort of thing. Thanks.
Well, I think the IMF and the World Bank are the 2 most important global players in the post-Cold War world that we have. But I think that in the past they used to be independent, and the World Bank would fund social action programs. For instance, we were able to build 30,000 schools in Pakistan because we raised the rupee component and they gave us a soft loan for the rest. So they had a very important role to play. But a new development has now taken place. And the new development is that the World Bank says that unless the IMF agrees with your economic policies, we are not going to give soft loans, even if they are for issues such as women's rights and education. So this is complicated issues. And as far as the IMF is concerned, they look at things purely in economic terms. They don't look at the political repercussions of a step. And for instance, the IMF objective was that Pakistan should bring down its deficit from 8% to 4%. Now later on we found out the deficit was really 9.2%. So they said, we don't care, you have to come down, you made a pledge, you have to come down to 4%. So I think in those terms, the IMF should keep as its goal deficit reduction, reduction in domestic borrowing, opening up of the economy, deregulation, but it should also be sensitive as to how much a country can take politically at a particular period of time. And I found that they did not look at things politically. They looked at things purely in economic terms, and I think they suffered setback after setback because they looked at things in economic terms. I'll give you an example. In 88-90, I brought down the budget deficit from 8% to 6.2%. My government was sacked. The budget deficit went up officially to 8% and unofficially to 9.2%. So over these last 3 years, I brought the deficit down by 3%, but they said that's not enough. And although it had come down, they said that you have to do more. I did more, and now it's shot up to 8% again. So they're not really reaching the targets that they want to reach either. And the new government that has come in has basically parted with the IMF. What they've told the IMF is that we're not interested in the standby agreement with you, and we are going to discuss the extended the ESAF, Structural Adjustment Program, with them. But the new government is just buying time. And what the new government is doing is a belief in human nature, which I wish I shared. They say that people are basically honest, and the government should stop interfering in their lives. So the new government has said that if a passenger is coming back from overseas, they can go through the red channel or the green channel, and nobody will be stopped. So everybody's going through the green channel, and our revenue collections, which used to be 500 million a day from one airport, have fallen to 5 million a day. Then the new government has said that businessmen are honest and they all would like to pay their taxes, so I'm going to sack half the custom officials. The result is that our revenue is really, really down, and I'm deeply concerned for the future of Pakistan, because I think that we might be in a position to default by next November to April. And I don't want to come back again, because I say that what's the point? I'll reduce the deficit, I'll become unpopular, and just as the country is about to take off, again the government will be destabilized and thrown out, and again we'll go backwards. Now in 1988, people were prepared to make the sacrifice, but they didn't get further. Then again from 93 to 96, they made the sacrifice. They didn't come out on the streets. The mullahs incited them. They refused to come out on the streets. But again, they're backwards. So you can't ask people to keep on paying $100 to cover 100 yards, because they've paid that $100 twice over, and yet they still have to cover that 100 yards. So Pakistan today is in a very, very vicious cycle, and I think that I have certain solutions. I think the solution means that the civil and military must work very closely together, because we are facing an emergency, and we've got to trust each other and work together. But I don't think somehow that people realize the gravity of the situation in Pakistan. They don't realize our debt problem. They don't realize our deficit problem. They don't recognize the fact that the trade gap is growing. They don't recognize the fact that population is a major problem. I mean, we had this plan to recruit 100,000 women workers. We recruited 43,000 to bring down population. The rest have been scrapped. We're the 9th most populous country in the world. So I think our problems are really related to debt and to demography and to democracy. And I think the time has come where the civil and military society joined hands. But I don't see that happening.
I think it was The Economist that published a survey that rated Pakistan as the 2nd most corrupt country in the world. And my question to you is, as a private citizen now, what kind of actions or policies do you think that you can take or plan to take, and how do you think that other private citizens could work to eradicate some of the corruption?
I think there is corruption in Pakistan. But I think the reason that there is corruption in Pakistan is because nobody's tried to touch corruption. It's been used as a tool for political victimization. In the past, when you didn't like somebody, you said, oh, they're communists, and everybody sort of ran away. And now you say they're corrupt, and everybody runs away without looking at what is corruption or not. I'd like to come to this rating of Pakistan as the so-called 2nd most corrupt country in the world. There was a man called Shahid Javid Burki who was very friendly with my president. And my president wanted to sack me, and he promised Mr. Shahid Javid Burki that he'd make him finance minister. So Shahid Javid Burki got his friend Mr. Vogel to set up something called Transparency International. And Mr. Vogel has now gone on record and said that the reason he reached the conclusion that Pakistan was the 2nd most corrupt country is because Mr. Burki introduced him to all his friends. And this is what I mean about instant media. You know, nobody goes into what is Transparency International. It was just 6 people who set it up together, and it was Mr. Burki introducing his friends to his friend Mr. Vogel. Now, the other aspect about corruption is that I think there are indicators of how you can bring corruption down. When I was Prime Minister, bank recoveries increased. Corruption is when you take a bank loan, then you don't pay it back because you've got the political influence. So I think that I look at the bank recoveries and I say that they dramatically increase. Number two, I think corruption, you can see that do your tax revenues increase or do your tax revenues decrease? And we had phenomenal increase in tax revenues. Illegal immigration is a very lucrative market. And before I became Prime Minister, you had umpteen illegal immigrants coming to the United States, for instance. And when I was Prime Minister, there was zero illegal immigration. What I'm trying to say is that corruption didn't go away. But at least with a government that was taking corruption as a serious issue, bank recoveries were better, tax recoveries were better, illegal immigration was decreasing, drug barons were on the run because they were getting arrested, extradited, tried, etc. I think it's very sad that a government that did so much against corruption was targeted as corrupt. I had a Western ambassador who marched into my office and said, Prime Minister, I want you to cancel this memorandum of understanding that you've got with this other firm. I said, I beg your pardon? He said, I want you to cancel this memorandum of understanding. I said, Ambassador, surely you recognize I can't do that. It's a legal document. And unless the company does not go by the memorandum, I can't cancel it. And he got all red in the face and he got angry. And I said, well, if you don't have anything else to say, we might as well bring this meeting to an end. And you know what? He went around telling everybody her government is stinking corrupt. I think he was corrupt. I think he was corrupt, belonging to a Western country that was giving my country assistance and coming and twisting my arms and telling me that get rid of this MOU that you've signed. Number two, I had an ambassador come to me and say, why is your country not buying wheat from my country? My country, there's corruption in your government and that's why they're not buying wheat from my country. So I called over my Minister of Agriculture and my Minister of Agriculture said, Prime Minister, here are the rates. Should I buy expensive wheat or should I buy cheap wheat? So this was the problem. Then the third thing, there was this man who works for the Pakistani intelligence, who's in Pakistan was started giving nice donations in America. So he started having access to powers of influence. And he started writing all these articles against me in the newspapers. And one of the articles he wrote and said is that she's buying military equipment from France because she wants to make commissions. That was not so. Let's admit it. Commissions are made on all these deals. I mean, I think people are hypocrites when they say that commissions aren't made. But I wanted to buy American goods. I came to America in April '95 and on C-SPAN, is it C-SPAN? The television show?
C-SPAN.
C-SPAN. And across the United States and to President Clinton, I said, we want to buy American planes. We want to give American workers jobs and we want to buy American planes because we think they're the best in the world. But if America doesn't give us its planes, obviously we still need the planes, we have to go to another country. And one day I think I'm going to write a book on corruption because I'm so fed up of all the people who I thought were corrupt and I refused to oblige them and found that they were saying they were corrupt. There was a man who worked for an international agency. I won't take its name. He was funding the building of a thermal power plant in Pakistan. So, you know, there were bids and all that, and a party got the thermal power plant. Lo and behold, as soon as it got it, he resigned from the international body and he started working for them. So, I mean, was he inclined to it because of any personal consideration or what? So corruption is endemic, and I think that we need a legislation on corruption. And I proposed in the Pakistan Assembly that there should be a parliamentary committee with equal representation to the opposition and the government. And I was Prime Minister when I said that. I said equal representation to the government and the opposition. And I said that any citizen of Pakistan should be able to come. They should be able to come on categories: bank defaulters, income tax evaders, and frontmen. I said, how do I know that somebody is not going around and saying, I'm so close to Benazir Bhutto, I can give you this deal, give me a commission. So I said, why should somebody misuse my name? And I said that if this committee feels that they have a prima facie case then they should send it for investigation. I said the government shouldn't do the investigation because the government relies on the bureaucracy, and many in the bureaucracy are already corrupt. So we should first, the politically elected people who have to go back and answer to their voters, we should examine the prima facie investigation. And I said, I offer myself for accountability first. I said, even though the Prime Minister has immunity, I voluntarily give up this immunity and start with me, but then spare nobody, from the President to the PN. I said, spare nobody. I said, I haven't taken a bank loan. I've been a taxpayer all my life, and I'm proud of my record. And I said, if anybody's been abusing my name, let them go to prison. Why should we put up with it? And 2 weeks after I said that, my government was sacked, because the President's own relatives were on the bank defaulters list. And I still believe that we must have legislation. I think it's shocking in Pakistan that there are people who have huge houses who don't pay tax. We're a population of 130 million people, and out of the population of 130 million people, only 800,000, that is not even 1 million, pay tax. And out of those 800,000, 500,000 are government servants, so that tax is deducted at source. And that comes to only 300,000. And I kept telling my machinery that just take the big cities, Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, the big cities. And I said, go out there and see if there's a man who has a Land Cruiser. A Land Cruiser costs $200,000 in Pakistan. If he has a Land Cruiser, he should be paying tax. I said, go out and see who has a house that is built on more than 1,000 square yards. I don't know what square yards used here, or 1,000 square yards. I said, if you can afford to have a house on 1,000 square yards, you can afford to be paying tax. But the machinery would not act. And then I said, let's privatize taxation. And when I said, let's privatize taxation, because somebody came up to me with a proposal and said that you give me a market. There was a market in a city called Lahore, and they said, you give me market and I will sign an agreement with you that I will give you 30 times more revenue than you are presently collecting. So I said, that sounds good. And as soon as I said it, they said, it's corruption. Why aren't you having a tender? Now, in a tender, anybody can come forward. I have no guarantee that they're really going to give me 30 times more or not. Somebody who's come up with the idea, who's been innovative enough, taken the initiative, should be rewarded for their innovation or their initiative. So in Pakistan, it's a lot of gridlock, even if you have ideas, how do you break through? And I think the first thing that we needed, which I wanted to do, I said, in my third year in office, because the first year I thought the bureaucracy is going to do it for me. So in my third year of office, I said, why don't I get university students? Or why don't I get the police? Or why don't I get a team of people together to go house to house and come back and say who's a taxpayer and who's not a taxpayer? And then I introduced something called the national tax number. And I said, everybody must pay the national tax, have a national tax number. And I said, anybody who does not have a national tax number and goes to buy a car, which costs $100,000, will have to pay a 15% as a fine, because that means they have enough money to be paying tax. And I said, anybody who wants to fly to America, which costs about $5,000 round trip, which is a lot of money for Pakistan because we have purchase power parity and all that, I said they should be paying tax. Well, as soon as I went, they changed it, because I had said that if I was buying and I showed my card, I was exempt. So they said that you could buy as long as I showed my card, you'd be exempt. So obviously you're not collecting taxes. So I think what we need to do is have a legislation which is broad-minded, with the opposition and the government equally represented. And I think what we need to do is crack down on people who are living so overtly, ostentatiously. I mean, it's really sickening that one has so much poverty on one side, and then we have so much affluence on the other side, and we have only 800,000 taxpayers. I mean, have affluence. I'm one of those people, I say, if you work hard, it's your money. Do what you want with it. But pay your dues. And if you pay your dues, I have no problem.
Do you believe it's possible for women to attain equality in the Muslim world? And what do you foresee for women's rights in Pakistan? You've obviously done a lot to advance the cause of women in your country.
I think Pakistan is today absolutely a different country from before it was when I became Prime Minister. Not because I became, because I think my victory was a victory not only for my party, but it was a victory for working women in Pakistan. Before, Pakistani women could become air hostesses, but they couldn't really work, or nurses. I mean, these were the two jobs for women. Now suddenly, ever since we opened the Women's Bank, we have women running bakeries, we have women running boutiques, women running exercise parlors and beauty salons, and we have a proliferation, furniture shops. I mean, you'd be surprised, the furniture shop market is dominated today by Pakistani women. So a lot of urban women are coming out and working in Pakistan. But you know, there's a big resentment against it. I found that even as women work, it's resented very strongly by men. And I found that resentment all along. I found it with ordinary people. And I couldn't, I mean, my supporters were fine, but you know, like my supporters are about 37% of the population normally. So that means 73% of the population does not agree with what we are doing. And that makes me feel very sad. You know, like when we started recruiting the 100,000 lady health workers, everybody said, oh, where are you going to get the women from? They're not women. And then they're always putting down women. In terms of jobs, women are being put down. In terms of promotion, women are being put down. And women have to work longer hours and harder hours to prove that they're equal to a man. And when my government was overthrown, I found the people who were targeted were the women. I mean, you'll be surprised to know that I had a managing director of the Pakistan television who was a lady. She's been put on an exit control list. She's not been allowed to leave the country. Her husband is a diplomat. He hasn't been given a posting. I had a secretary of women's development who negotiated Pakistan's admission, the signing of CEDAW at the Beijing conference on women. And they instituted a case against her and made that poor woman go from city to city and courtroom to courtroom with lawyers. She was not a rich woman. She had to spend money hiring lawyers to try and get her from one place to another. Then I had a social sector secretary called Shanaz Wazir Ali. She was opened up for investigations. And then, do you believe my hairdresser was also put on the list for investigations? I was horrified when I went to her. So this, when women are obviously made a target of victimization, then this discourages women from working. So in Pakistan, although women have made many gains, we have not overcome prejudice in men, and we have not even overcome prejudice in many women. Now I'll tell you something surprising, that it's not only men who are against women, but the painful part is that often women are against women. And we'll have people who are, whose sons are getting married, and they'll say, I don't want that as a daughter-in-law. She's a working woman. She's going to neglect your house. She's going to neglect your children. She's not going to take care. So, you know, it seems a very strange battle that women fight, and sometimes a very lonely battle, because one would expect that men in traditional roles would oppose a woman, but it's also women who sometimes oppose, and I think the opposition from women is more hurtful.
I was curious. Okay, I was curious how you think that the repealment of the 8th Amendment will affect the stability of the government in Pakistan.
I think the repeal of the 8th Amendment was a very big moral vindication for us, because really it was my party that had been the victim of the 8th Amendment. The last party had been restored to power and resigned. But I don't think the government in Pakistan is very stable, even though they have a 90% majority in parliament, but it's a majority that the election commission says took place. There have already been riots in different parts of the country. The law and order situation has deteriorated, and the country is heading towards a financial collapse. I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, and I said the government and the opposition should really get together to discuss the issue of corruption, because it's become a very important political issue in Pakistan. The reason that it's become an important political issue is that people feel that unemployment and inflation will go if corruption goes. Now obviously eliminating corruption will give some dividends, But unemployment and inflation will go only when we deal with demography and debt. And the Prime Minister has not yet responded. And that's why I said I also wish you good luck. Because I know that the situation is that there are certain forces which are very militant and they want democracy to fail and they want a pluralistic system to fail, and they want to say we've had Benazir twice and we've had Nawaz Sharif twice and both of them were corrupt and there was unemployment in both times and there was inflation in most times. Because the Prime Minister comes from the majority province of the Punjab, I think he has a 50-50% chance of surviving. But the odds are heavily weighted against him. And I think it will only be by April 1998 that we will know whether Pakistan has got political stability or not. Because I think that if he crosses into 1998, then we will enter a period of relative stability.
Due to the time constraints, this will be the last question.
I wanted to ask about if you can care to comment on the general lack of economic development that has taken place in Pakistan and in India. A lot of people will say that maybe these countries have failed to advance because of Cold War politics, because of huge populations, and all these other conflicts that have taken place and the lack of democracy. But I give you South Korea, that was the greatest scene of the Cold War conflict. Indonesia has a large population. Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, all of these countries have had, they've not been the most open or democratic societies, yet the living standards, the poverty has been taken away in such, over the last 50 years, it's an economic miracle. Why has this not happened in Pakistan, maybe in India? Would you care to comment on that?
Well, I can't answer for India, but I can tell you that Pakistan had tremendous amounts of foreign and military assistance, foreign military and economic assistance, and that was a real window of opportunity for us. But unfortunately, because the economic assistance we got and the military assistance we got was during the period of military dictatorship, there was a neglect of the social indicators. Money didn't go in for education, it didn't go in for health, it didn't go in for childcare, it didn't go in for the dignity of women. So if we have a workforce that is poorly trained, that is poorly educated, and that is largely malnourished and therefore prone to falling ill, obviously our economy is not going to grow. Now the days of dictatorship are over, but the days of foreign military and economic assistance are also over. So the bonanza years are over, and we are finding it difficult to deal with the situation, because now we have to buy planes, whereas we got them first in assistance. Now we have to buy wheat, although first we got it free in assistance. But if I look at Indonesia and Korea, I don't know about Korea. If I look at Indonesia, I think they were able to put their political disputes on the back burner. India and Pakistan were not able to put their political disputes.
Not yet.
Not yet. So maybe one of the reasons that they developed economically was because they put the political disputes on the back burner and we didn't. So we spent too much than we would otherwise on keeping an alert, a defense alertness. But I think that the primary reason that Pakistan stayed backward was a lack of human resource development. And I think even today people don't understand the importance of human resource development. I think even today they're paying too little attention to sewerage, drainage, education, health, and technological training. We have people who come out with degrees in geography and history. But in Pakistan, we have to import labor for carpentry, for mechanics, for stone cutting, and for the services industry. So we've got to understand the market, and we've got to try and train our people to meet the demands of the market. Could you answer that question and help me out on why the others have done so well and we haven't?
Well, in terms of South Asian politics, I think the hostility between India and Pakistan is a major factor. I mean, I wish the subcontinent would never have been partitioned. I can visualize Well, Madam Prime Minister,
He's
then
going
you
to
would
give
have been
me
the
a
Prime
heart
Minister.
attack, so don't worry.
Then you would have been the Prime Minister of India.
Oh dear, I'm sorry I asked you to answer that. Can I take it back?
Well, the hour went by very fast. I still see there are so many hands, and the Prime Minister perhaps will be willing to answer all the questions, but her plane leaves at about 2:40, and we have to go for lunch. I would like to thank the Prime Minister from the bottom of our hearts to take the time, and I know that you have traveled all the way from Pakistan, and I'm sure that during this hour you have converted many more hearts, and there will be many students coming to me tomorrow and the next week and asking me if there's a possibility that they would be going to Pakistan, if not to India. Thank you very much. In the South Asian tradition,
you.
I will say namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you.
But it'll be
It's
nice.
very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.